Jackpot does have a much more digestible ring to it, but Jesus, this is seems a bit excessive. Hello, everyone. Terrence here with Hollywood Already Did It. If you haven't already, go ahead, like, share, subscribe to the channel, leave a comment, ring that bell below. Anytime we have something, you will be among the first to know. All caught up now. So these should be happening in real time. But I have seen the fourth episode of the Peripheral called The Jackpot. And we get a bit of explanation why Flynn kept noticing that there just did not seem to be that many people around in this time. Um, and so we sort of get a readout of why things are the way that they are. But like with the last episode, we sort of get a cold opening. A cold opening gives us a little bit of more backstory about the couple of characters that are in the episode that we're dealing with. In this one, we get a follow up to Wolf, at this point, young Wolf, formerly known as Wolf, but now becoming Wilf. I hate that there's just a vowel difference between the two of them. Change his name completely. It's gonna take away his blackness. But you get young Wolf and Alita and how they're sort of groundswell of what their relationship was before they were adopted by the family that they were adopted by. Get the cold opening and you see that they were a bunch of homeless kids who were scavenging for food, and they had sort of created a group that they were doing this together for. And on the bus, they come back with their rations. And apparently, Wolf's amount brought back wasn't to the satisfactory of the biggest bully there, the biggest bully of the pack, and he sort of lets Wolf know about it. But Alita sticks up for him. And so you can sort of see that their bond has been there. She's like, I'll give you, I brought in enough for everybody. And he's like, well, give him your rations. But then they start seeing in the distance that there's a bunch of people, looks like they're getting food, rations, some type of care from a van from afar. And so the bully, the bigger one of them, says, hey, to make up for you not bringing in the food, Wolf, go see what's going on there. And the leader's like, no, you don't have to prove yourself, you don't have to do anything. But Wolf's like, no, I will do this. I can do this. Sort of trying to make proof of himself and kind of like get that monkey out of his back. But the leader's like, you have nothing to prove. But he goes out to do it. Once he sort of gets to the wall there, he kind of sees like there's a reflection. He then takes a stone and throws it, and he sees that that is just a mirage. It's a visual imaging that has been put up. And then he sees two folks in yellow hazmat suits come towards him and snatch up both he and Alito. Now, it's interesting that they're in hazmat suits because that means that something happened in this world that is not allowing them to breathe the air satisfactorily. There's something wrong with whatever it is that has happened, and we learn a little bit more about that on the back end of the episode. We then head to the future where Wolf reports to Lev about what they found. They found the Alita's chip, and then they got two CPU chips from the peripherals that were there. But that is all that they have. No other really clues that'll lead them to Alita. Lev kind of lays it on pretty thick to Wolf to say that he's an F up a little bit, sort of like how the bully was letting on the bus that he was an F up. But in this, he's saying like, hey, your DNA is all over that building. Your DNA is all over this body that is being killed. And they're going to come start looking for you. You might want to lay low. Yes, I could go send a team in there to go clean it up. But if I did that, and then they're caught, then that's going to come back to me. So we're in a bit of a pickle. And right now, I'd rather the heat fall on you than fall on me. And then he goes on a little bit like, I don't know how long Alita is going to last without having this immunity booster in her with this chip. Which lets me believe that everybody who was alive at this point in time, because if something had taken place and the air quality is not good, people who are actually alive, the peripherals are fine because they're not breathing that, actually breathing in the air, but it lets me to believe that the folks that are of that world, who are born and raised in that, if they don't have that chip, the breathing becomes somewhat difficult, and they may not. The disease may become too much for them to actually live naturally without having that sort of chip put in them. That's just my guess, because I don't see. This is the first time that we're hearing that if you don't have a chip, you may lose your bit of your health may go towards the negative. Back in present day, Flynn is doing the normal bathroom routine, brushing her teeth, washing her face. While she's doing so, she sees that she has blood in her eye. And it, I will say this is the first time in this entire series where I said that doesn't look good. You can sort of see the red CGI. It's like, ah, that looks sort of bad. But there's blood in her eye. But then she starts having another spasm at the hand, and it's getting worse and worse. It's amazing. You can also hear like sort of the bones crunching when they do that. Her health is going in the toilet. Some of this was already happening with just going back and forth in the peripheral, but it seems like the shock of that gun that was happening in the future, with her attachment to it, it is having an even more detriment effect for her in the present day. But then Tommy shows up. She looks back in the mirror and that blood is gone. She seems to be fine. Tommy shows up and it's kind of like, hey, I saw you shaking the hand of Mr. Pickett. Is everything good? You guys are fine. And Burton sort of throws them off scent. Like, yeah, we're good. Everything's fine here. They lie. And then Burton and Flynn get into a bit of an argument about it because Flynn's like, well, I don't feel right not telling him. Like, he can help us. And Burton's keeping it real. But again, as much as Burton sort of comes off as dick to Flynn, Burton is right in a lot of these aspects. Like, there are bodies strewn all over our backyard. If we tell him, yes, as a friend, he may try to back us up, but he's also a cop, and we can't just have 10 bodies. He's going to have to go into cop mode if he starts seeing bodies. And Burton sort of pushes back and says, you're not thinking with the right frame of mind. You're thinking because you have a crush on him, that you're thinking with this emotional brain, and he's not going to follow suit with that. So you need to be a little bit careful. She starts telling him and checking him like, hey, this whole time while you were out doing your stuff with the war, like a war that you chose to go be a part of, I had to stay here and take care of home. I was doing this, I was doing that. And while she's getting more and more agitated, more ramped up, her eyes start swelling up, and there's a huge bruise that appears. She starts getting blood in her eye, and then she goes into a huge seizure. We then get a shot of Charisse in the future having her team recreate Daniel, a version of Daniel. Sort of like the mom in the last episode had a version of Alita, wanted a version of Daniel. And so we see how that all sort of happens, how they build the gait, the white, the width, the shoulder height, the vocal inflection, kind of we can see in real time how that sort of gets deciphered and made out. Charisse wants to have that remodel of Daniel back. And at first I'm like, it's kind of selfish, like, why would you want Daniel back? Like, you seem to not really care that much for him, but Daniel does, the last remnants of his memory does have some things invested in him that can be helpful to her and her continuation of figuring out how to get to Flynn. And after she gets everything sort of modulated to where she wants, it's funny. The specific one is like, I was like, no, he's a little too agreeable. Let's bring that agreeability down a little bit. Once we get there, we learn that Daniel did a body scan and recognized Wilf and kind of laid out the land. Like Wilf and his known associates, which was Lev, who she's already aware of. And I was like, all right, cool. That helps me a little bit of a breadcrumb. I might have to go stop by and have a conversation with Lev. Back in the real time, Burton rushes Flynn to the hospital to go get a checkup, just get a scan and get everything checked out. She says she's fine, but Burton's like, no, you had a full-on seizure and just lost your ish. I'm not going to take you for your face value. Takes her to the doctor, but the doctor, just as a heads up, is the wife or the fiance to Tommy. Dee Dee is her name. And so any information that they sort of give or give beyond is going to probably in some way get back to Tommy. So they have to be a little bit cagey about that. And Burton's like, don't tell her anything. And then we get in there and Burton tells her something. And it's like, well, hold on. You just told me not to say anything. But enough to not super alarm her, but does at least put her on the track, which is just an odd way to do it. But Didi says that none of the seizures seem to be like life-threatening, and they can't find a pinpoint cause. It doesn't seem to be coming from something that is internal. Something else is going on here. And then Burton's like, yeah, it's just a new sim that she got, and they got it from a place in Colombia. But, we don't really know what it is. Being vague, but also giving a little bit of information. And she's like, well, okay, I would say don't put the headset back on. And that's all Burton really wanted. He wanted the doctor to tell her not to put the headset on because Flynn, hard-headed ass, was not listening to him, so he needed a medical opinion or a medical doctor to say, don't put that headset back on. But as they're leaving, she does say, hey, Burton, when you get a chance, make sure you give me the information for that Colombian so I can see so I can look it up. But he plans to just do the denial, dash and denial type of thing, where he keeps moving to the next thing. He's like, she's a bit busy enough, doctor. There's enough stuff happening in this town that she's going to forget about this and is going to get bombarded with other things and not worry about this. Back home, when she gets home, Flynn starts watching old home movies on a different peripheral. It's not the same one. It's a different headset. And he's watching old home movies. Bird's like, I think the doctor said stay off of the headset, and she's like, well, not all headsets. She just said that one. So she's watching an old home movie of her and Burton when they were kids at Halloween. It looks like trick or treating with mom and their parents. A much happier time that they were at. And in that, Burton apologizes because he feels sort of guilty for putting her through this stress, putting her body through this, an unknown sim, and putting her through the rigmarole that's sort of taken place. And he feels at fault for all of this. And that's when Flynn tells her, like, no. I need you to understand that place it's a magical experience to be in there. Like, I love every moment that I am in there. So you don't need to apologize to me. I would do it in a heartbeat. And I want to go back. You're just not letting me. No one's letting me because they feel like it's a health risk. Burton tells his friends, Connor being one of them, that, hey, I want to get back in that. I want to get back. I want to log in myself. And one friend's like pretty hesitant, but Connor's like, I'm all in because he would love to, if nothing else, to be able to have a moment where he has a body, where he has a leg and legs and arms. Because in real world, he doesn't, which makes sense. It's always something that I kind of thought of for a while. I was like, oh, he would probably killed to be in there, which is, it may become a drug to him. He has been addicted to alcohol and seems to have been intoxicated and overindulged in that. I think if he gets this taste that he has in this episode of it, this may become a problem long term that he may want to keep logging back in there because unlike everybody else, he doesn't have the ability to walk, run on his own in the real world. We see a shot of Wilf in Lev's mansion, going to get some tea or some type of green juice, and a woman who I believe is to be Lev's wife or some type of significant other for him. She says that I didn't trust Wilf for the longest because every time that I walk in a room, you would jump out of a room, you would dodge out of a room, and then I realized that that's just who you are, and I realized that when Lev and I saw you dancing somewhere. That there's something more to you, and I'd just like you to dance with me. So they have a dancing scene. This definitely feels like one of those arbitrary things, but there's a character building point to that. But also Lev is watching because of the sensory he's attached to this woman. He's seeing the whole movement, and he gets sort of thrown off because all of a sudden Cherie shows up at the little tea place that he's at, and Cherie's coder confronts him and says, "You stole something from me." And Lev feigns another feigning of ignorance. And so Charissa reminds him that there's a hierarchy. There's like a triangle that sort of exists in this world now of 3 levels of quote-unquote government. Klept oligarchy, which Lev's a part of, which I guess is sort of the crew that has been used to reestablish order in the muck of chaos that existed post the Jackpot, which we'll learn about later. The Met Police, who are in place to make sure that the oligarchy doesn't go too far off the rails with their choice of what to do and what to put into place. And then there's the RI, which is what we refer to, but it's the research institute who handles all the tech stuff to kind of make all the stuff work, everything sort of grow and be a part of that. And each of them have levels of what they can and can't do, and they can't cross bounds, and they never really overstep their bounds with each other. They're all there to sort of keep the ball rolling. And when they don't, she reminds you, or when they step out of line, that's when chaos ensues. And I'm here to sort of make sure that we're not stepping across the lines and nothing bad is happening. She reminds him of a time where there's a person named Yuri who overstepped a bit, and we used some technology to find his DNA, and we realized that he was the one doing so, and we removed him from the table. And so in a roundabout way, she sort of threatens him the same way that Yuri was threatened with his own DNA. She's like, I have something I can look up the DNA, and we may have to do that with you. And the conversation ends, but he notices at that point the teacup that he was drinking out of is gone. She has his DNA. Back in present day, Connor does plug into the machine. And in plugging into the machine, Ash immediately notices that that's not, just by the look and reaction, that that's not Flynn. But then can technology wise see that the person that's got the peripheral on is not the same person. And then they see that as Connor. And Connor starts running as Flynn in the peripheral starts running, but then they are able to disconnect it. Flynn is continuing to watch more home movies on the older the older headset, and then Will shows up in that, and Will and she have a combo. Will informs her that Connor has logged in her body, and she's like, okay, got it. That's news that she wasn't aware of because at this point she was not been told that. Will admits that he has a sister, and Flynn tells her that she's done some research on Lev Zabov in her present time, and that and he's like he plays dumb. He's like, well, what do you know? What did you find out? And she's like, well, this Lev had his entire family killed. He's had his family killed, his kids, everything's been wiped off the board. It was a mafia man. And he's like, okay, cool. You can tell it's one of those ones where he's like, gee, I don't know what you're talking about. I've never, that's not him. But you know, oh crap, that's him. But then he takes off, and before he does, he lets her know that Alita is his sister. Wolf quickly gets back to Lev and lets Lev know that Flynn is aware that he is who he says he is. He lets him know about his family. Lev doesn't seem shocked or surprised. He's like, no, okay, she's smart enough. I can kind of see how that she was going to find that out. He informs Wolf that he had Alita hired because he wanted a stub of his own. He wanted a stub to sort of test out pharmaceuticals on that stub before he kind of took it himself, and that was the whole plan. He said that he was troubled and by some of the other stubs, versions of himself in the other stubs, so he had his family killed. So this is clearly a man who is not altogether there. So now we're playing this real world where we're kind of like, I don't know if he or Charisse is correct. They both seem to have some corrupt ideals, and when you're dealing with the hierarchy of this triangle of government that they've sort of put in to reestablish post the Jackpot, now it is no longer quite as clear as to who is the right person and who is the wrong person. We then have Flynn meet Burton and Connor at the trailer, and she informs them of the house model that she saw that had all the model figures of them in front. That's when Burton's like, all right, we got to do things differently. You thought this was a sim when you first went in. Let's treat this as a sim. How do you normally operate when we're testing stuff, when we're doing our normal thing? How do you normally operate to test a sim, to break a sim, if you will? And she says, normally I go in there and I explore. I try to break stuff as much as I possibly can, and I die a lot. I die a whole bunch. But I explore, and then I start taking over and controlling and kind of figuring out what works, and then I become elite at it. And Burton's like, let's do that. Let's explore. Let's break stuff. And so they get their hack team at the printing facility to sort of just stay on guard and just keep her locked in as much as she can, because she knows that once she gets in and they're aware that she starts leaving, they're going to try to boot her out of the system. And so she gets there, and Ash sees her immediately and is like, stalls up to Dom, is like, hey, start disconnecting her. But she is allowed to leave. She leaves. She continues going on. There's a bit of a mishap of who takes over the hacking situation. She loses control for a bit. They think they won, or they got it all figured out, and then she gets right back in there. And she just keeps asking the question. She keeps asking the question she wants to explore. It's like, where are all the people? There are no people here. Please tell me why, Ash. I'm just asking a simple question. Answer me this. Where are the people? So Ash just has to show Flynn what she wants. And she calls Wilf and says, meet me here. And they take Flynn to a bit of a gravesite where they're like, this is the answer to the question you're seeking. What happened to all the people? And then they start seeing some floating objects that occur above their heads, and it sort of Wolf explains to Flynn that it's or sort of acts like a museum, and this museum is telling you piece by piece what happened in the jackpot, which for them actually is the apocalypse. It's just they renamed it because apocalypse is kind of on the nose and a little bit more harrowing. The jackpot is a sequence of things that sort of decimate humanity in its entirety. The first is an electrical blackout that occurs in 2039 that kind of takes the entire electrical grid off the entire world. 2039 in Flynn's present day is only 7 years away. So that is the first thing that's kind of harrowing. She's like, wait, that's only 7 years away. And the look that Wilf gives her is kind of like, crap, we are putting a lot of pressure and pain on this girl to know that the world for her, as long life as she knows, is about to come to an end. A couple of years later, there is a pandemic that takes place in sort of a blood plague that affects the internal organs and causes them to burst at a moment's notice and wipes out a ton of other people. The third is this environmental breakdown catastrophe that sort of happens over the course of several decades and wipes out about 7 billion people. It's a more of a long-term thing. Final is a domestic terror attack known as the Ash that just, it's the end. It's what wipes everything else off. And that's why it's sort of the beginning when we saw Wolf and Alita when they were younger. Those folks that were coming to them were wearing hazmat suits because of the air quality with the nuclear thing. It's not that far removed from that time because the 4 decades occurred time-wise. They wouldn't be that far away with a 70-year jump from one to the other. At that point, it gets a little freaky. The Ash sort of surrounds Flynn in this mock-up museum they'd made, and Flynn asked to be let out. And they release her. And then Connor and Burton are there waiting for, they ask for 2 bodies to be made for them so they can start jumping in there with her to just kind of even the playing field a little bit for her. And they ask them what's going on. She just says, nope, I'm working on it. But that is the furthest thing from her concern at this point because she knows that in 7 years, the world as she knows it is going to cease to exist. A couple of things that are interesting in this episode is that we don't get any Pickett or Jasper in this, so we don't pick up that sort of story thread of him trying to figure out what's happening in their world. But there's a lot of more character development for Burton and Flynn, and a little bit for Wilf, but also putting Connor into the mix, as I think he's going to become addicted to that machine once he finally gets a body in there and is able to do his thing. We now know the inciting incident that sort of stops the world, but we know that it's not just one thing, it's several things that happen at just different pinpoints. So as we go along, this could become sort of an apocalyptic world. I don't know how the books go. People who've read the books, you're going to have to help me out a little bit, but I don't know if we jump years or if we get to the point where we're 7 years ahead. But there's a lot of terrible things that occur, and some of the people that are in present day, namely Mr. Pickett, could be responsible for any of those type of things. But what we know now is that there's in place after all of these things occur, there's a placement of a trio of things that are sort of set in place to be the new governing bodies of the new future, the new world. And the Met Police seem to be the one that's probably the best because they're not run by the oligarchy or the RI. They're kind of that in between to make sure that everybody's on their P's and Q's. But those two heads seem to be at a budding odds. And there seems to be a battle of who is the better one. But I have a feeling that the coldness that they both have, that one of them is responsible for some of these jackpot pieces that have taken place, and that they put some of this into motion. I still stand by the fact that I think Alita is in some way related or a part of the family of the Flynns, and that's kind of why that model was there, that clock was at 2:15. It kind of just all sort of plays in line that she has something to do with that family. I'm also still trying to figure out what is causing the malfunctions that Flynn is having in real time in the present day. Getting all of a sudden a black eye when she didn't have one, and then it going away. The blood eye, the spasm that keeps happening. Something's happening, but it's not showing up on any type of screen. So I am wondering if her continuing to go back to that present day and not having any type of, if the sensories that she's um, getting there in that world where Pulse and the people who have a chip are allowed to have some sort of immunity. But if, I'm wondering if she's been in there so many times that her sensories, she is not getting the immunity that she needs, and like her real life body is being affected by some of the pain points that are happening in the present day. It's the only thing I can think of because nothing showing up on a doctor scan. It may be something that they are not able to quite see yet because some of the issues are so far advanced. I do hope in the next episode we start seeing some more Mr. Pickett because I do just like that character, but obviously he's not the big bad of this. He's the present day bad, whereas I think Charisse is the one that's kind of the most feared. But I don't think I think Lev, if he's willing to murder versions of himself and versions of himself's family, he's clearly not to be trusted either. And I think Flynn needs to have Connor and Burton in there to sort of figure out who's on the up and up and who's not. And I think once they get in there, Burton is going to make sure that Wilf is not as close to his sister as he has been in the previous episodes. He's going to be play big brother to her. And it should be an interesting dynamic to sort of see how that all plays when she is not the lone rabbit going in Alice in Wonderland. She's not the lone person in that world when she starts getting a little bit of help. I don't know how much bullying can happen to her or how much pressure can be put on her when you have those two backing her up. But I'm excited to see what that all plays like. What did you guys think about this episode called The Jackpot? Do you feel relief knowing what the jackpot is and how this world, the future became the way that it is? And now knowing that, are you now curious as to how the society was built back up? That's where I'm I'm curious. Like I know that we have that triangle put into place, but how now is kind of want to figure out how did that get put in place. What did you guys think about the episode? Leave your thoughts and comments in the comments below. If you haven't already, you can follow us on Twitter at HollywoodADI, or you can hit us up on email at HollywoodAlreadyDidIt@gmail.com. We also have a podcast with the same name. That's on Google Podcasts, Spotify, Apple Podcasts, any other place podcasts. We're there. And like always, I got my ticket. You got yours.